My name's Eric Cowney. I'm a community development worker with the Belfast Interface Project, which works all over Belfast and all the different interfaces. My particular job within the project is helping communities source conflict transformation skills and community education, and also facilitating inter-community dialogue, processes of inter-community dialogue. We're a membership organisation, and I think the main aim of this conference is to bring the practitioners of interface community development together and to work out how the implementation of the shared future policy can best address the needs of the interface communities. It's a very specific piece of work. Interface is a very unique piece of work, and there's problems specific to interface areas that don't really apply in other parts of Belfast. It's kind of like the last part of Northern Ireland to come out of conflict because of the proximity of these barriers and the tensions that exist there, you know. I think this particular conference's main aim would be to put pressure on the government that as it implements, as it puts a shared future into practice, that it bears in mind, it keeps to the forefront of its mind the specific needs of interface communities.
And I wanted to come, A, because the Interface project is so hugely important to the whole of the community, and secondly, because we now have, in a shared future, I believe, an overarching policy not only applies for the public sector, that is government policies, but throughout the voluntary community sectors and the private sector. So I wanted to try and just outline a vision of what a shared future in Northern Ireland might be for the whole community. I also wanted to encourage and support the tremendous work that's being done at interfaces. I mean, for example, as I said in the conference today, this has been the quietest summer we've had, particularly in Belfast, and that is directly attributable to a huge amount of work which people on the interfaces and community and political leaders in those areas undertook during the year. So I wanted to come and be supportive to that. And thirdly, I wanted to try and set the particular work of interfaces in the broader context of a shared future, which is I believe, not only an important strategy, but it's actually a vision and a challenge for all of us who live in this community to aspire to. There's already a lot of work underway. One of the good things, I believe, is that the term "a shared future" is now being used more and more by politicians, by community leaders, by the media. In fact, it was also the subject of a recent report in the Assembly, or part of a report in the Assembly. Now, we need to make more progress. We need to make sure that government policies, as they're rolled out right across the public sector, have a shared future and they're at the heart of what they do. I'm hoping that we'll be able to do more around the whole integrating education issue as a result of the report that Sir George Bain is going to produce later this month. But that's only one example. We're doing a lot of work working with communities, for example, on the whole question of the images of removing murals, of a policy that we have, for example, on flags and curbstone paintings, etc., which are, during this sort of marching season, a legitimate representation of that particular culture. But at the end of the marching season, we've been doing a lot of work in trying to remove those so that the communities can continue with their work throughout the rest of the year. Yeah. But we also want to restore pride. We also want to make sure that these are areas that people want to live in, want to work in. We want to attract investment to that. So the physical appearance of those areas is extremely important, and that's why we believe that the Interface project, as I said, is tremendously important. But also bodies such as the Housing Executive, the Road Service, Belfast City Council, working together in a consortium to address those things is important. And there's a lot of evidence that that's happening, but we can do more.
The Finicky Crossroads Group was established 2 years ago. It's a cross-community group that comprises community activists from the Nationalist and Republican West and South Belfast and community activists from the Loyalist and Unionist South and West Belfast. It's primarily set up to tackle issues like community safety and, of course, tackling the sectarian undercurrent of violence that occurred within that area was one of our priorities. I hope to, first of all, give participants an insight into the work of our group, and let them maybe come away with something from the work that we've been doing in addressing restricted access. And I believe that a lot of the work that we have been doing can actually be used as an example of good practice for the rest of Belfast. I think in many ways community activists on the interfaces are showing the way for politicians. The workers on the ground do work together. They do recognise that there's common issues that need addressed. They are working on socio-economic issues that affect both respective communities. They're working on them together. They're coming up with shared visions. They're coming up with great action plans now. And I think it's about time that the politicians would have followed suit in that. In Finnegy, probably the first and foremost thing we have been doing is we've actually been sitting down and meeting as one group. I think it's unique in Belfast, and the fact that we have the cross-community aspect in one group. We have nationalists, unionists, loyalists and Republicans all sitting down. We've agreed a vision for our area, and we've agreed an action plan for our area. And what we're actually doing now is sitting down and trying to implement that. And that involves us engaging in youth work. It involves us engaging in diversity work. It would involve us working with local businesses and traders, the statutory and the voluntary sector. One of the easiest things to describe what we'll be doing would be in relation to, there was a lot of sort of low-level sectarian violence in the area, and when we looked at it, we actually discovered that it was in relation to the local off licences that were serving alcohol to minors. And young people from all over, not just the Finnegy area, but from all over Belfast, were coming to Finnegy to access alcohol from this off licence, and that was leading to a lot of the conflict, and that was leading to a lot of the trouble, which had the knock-on effect in the area for the residents. And what we were able to do was actually just go and have a meeting with the local off sales, go and have a meeting with the regional managers, and get them to introduce a strict no ID, no alcohol policy. And that had near enough overnight success. The incidents in sectarian trouble and the incidents in violence in the crossroads dropped dramatically within that time. We're working on a lot of other things like shared access to, and that's what I'm speaking on today, shared access to resources within the area. And we've been successful in that also, I think. Our group, if you look at the group and if you look at the makeup of the group, it's reflective of nearly every section within that community, and probably apart from some of the ethnic minority communities, which is something that does concern me, but it has received great support from the local community.
The job that I do is multifaceted, so it is. The main theme of it is to build relationships within Shortstrand and with neighbouring communities, tackling attitudes around sectarianism, building up partnership approaches to joint programmes, whether it be cross-border or cross-community, with the main emphasis on youth and mental health. I'd say that over this past year or so, one of the major successes we had last year was the Lantern Parade, which happened in East Belfast. Traditionally, the Lantern Parade would have been held in the heart of East Belfast, and because we come from the Shortstrand, we work in the Shortstrand, people in Shortstrand felt excluded from taking part. Last year we were able to negotiate and work with the organisers on a cross-community level, and a lot of the youth organisations, and get the final event moved to a more neutral venue, which was down at the bottom of Newton Arch Road, Shortstrand Junction. So that was one of the successes we had of last year of partnership working and actually tackling the issue around exclusion by venues and actually shared space. So it was a fun activity. We had over 500 young people from Shortstrand took part and dressed up with lanterns and had a good fun night. Some of the projects we're working on now, we're now coming to completion of a cross-community, cross-border project where there's 36 young people from the ages of 14 right up to 18 have been working together from Shortstrand and East Belfast and Carlingford. They focused mainly on outdoor pursuits, and they took part in the Tarry and Ride Challenge this year over the Mourne Mountains for 2 days. A lot of the stuff we would have done in the workshop stuff would have been dealing with conflict resolution, so it would have ways of what young people felt it was their culture. One of the main evenings of dealing with it was when we were able to get the young people to split into 3 groups, and one was the Parades Commission, one was the Orange Order, and another one represented the residents group. And in a campfire in Castlewellan, we set about discussing these in separate groups with a number of different questions about a scenario, about a parade passing through an area and how would it be dealt with. And successfully, the young people were able to look at it logically with a bit of fun, a bit of crack, and come up with some proposals to deal with it. And I think one of the main things that stick in my mind was one of the young people from Carlingford says, we've been working together for months and we're supposed to be working on issues of Catholic and Protestant. He was, and I don't even know who's Catholic and Protestant still, so we must be doing something right. So they were enjoying themselves, they weren't avoiding the issues, they were dealing with sectarianism, they were dealing with the perception of the border. The project they were involved in was being funded by a group called New Border Generations, which is based in Carlingford and is funded under IFI. So to me, that was a great success. Another one of the successes we were able to do was we were able to bring some people from inner East Belfast together with a group of males and females from the Short Strand adults. They looked at the whole stuff around cultural diversity, shared experiences, which resulted in them going over to Belgium to see the First World War Somme sites in a project called the Mazines Project. As a follow-on from that, they were able to also go to Dublin for 4 days and look at it from a nationalist point of view, exploring culture from 1916 right through, reasons why people went to war in the First World War, why nationalists and why unionists for various different reasons participated within the war. So they are some of the good successes that are tangible, that you can see, which are changing attitudes, which are exploring how people feel about each other and issues of history, which should be shared. But apart from that, we have ongoing stuff on a regular basis. So we have about partnership building. We would be in, there's a group called the East Belfast Youth Workers Forum, which we meet regular. And it's youth workers from throughout East Belfast, regardless of race or creed, who come together on a monthly basis to discuss issues relevant to youth work and put into practice. So that's the type of successes which I would see as tangible. There's lessons to say that people are mature enough to sit down and analyse what is exactly going on, that everything isn't just purely sectarian, that there is political overtones to a lot of the social issues that we live in. I mean, bad housing, unemployment, lack of investment within health. I mean, mental health within the area where we live is at an all-time high, and especially young people. You're only now getting a realisation that from the health boards and strategies put in place to deal with that there. If you look at the suicide strategy approach, I mean, it's now coming to fruition. It's nowhere near what it is in Scotland. I mean, hopefully, with the work that's being done on the ground, it will show that a devolved government needs to come in place to better furnish the communities. Because people with local knowledge will have a better understanding of what a community needs, and they're more accountable also. So I think those type of approaches, people are being real. They're challenging politicians. It's not good enough to sit back now. You need to deliver.
We, in the Community Relations Initiative within the Link Resource Centre, what we do is to develop communities, develop their capacity in terms of promoting dialogue with other groups, cross-community dialogue. We have a number of programmes running where we develop training with groups on community relations. We facilitate groups in developing the issues that make an impact on their communities. We were involved with the Cemetery Sunday protest, which was up in the Carnmoney area quite recently. We were in negotiations with a group that were part of the protest, and thank goodness we got a peaceful outcome to that there. But I suppose what we really do is work in partnership with other organisations within North Belfast and beyond to develop peace initiatives to take us away from the conflict that for so long has existed. Unfortunately, North Belfast would have probably the most interfaces within Belfast, so we've quite a lot of work to do. So we're currently working with Rathcoole Transformation Group as part of the East Belfast Transformation Forum and the Longlands, Bonmore, Whitewell communities. That's both Loyalist and Republican communities who identified quite a bit of trouble between the youths from these areas. They were clashing. It would have been so easy to put it into the one bag and said, look, this is just sectarian. But the reality is that it was a lack of resources for the youth. It was boredom. And I suppose the area, there was little or no youth communities or whatever in the area. So I suppose what we did was we managed, we then took away the young people on different outings, such as paintballing, to try and get talking to them to see what were the issues for them. I mean, there's no point in coming up with strategies to look at youth if you're not engaging with youth to find out what the issues are. So we done that, as well as I say, the conflict, the crisis intervention. That's certainly one of them, and it's ongoing. It's short term. It's a short term resolve to the problem. However, we are in the long term looking towards developing a long term strategy, which will set something in place to transform away from conflict. As I say, we were part of the negotiation group with the Carnmoney Cemetery, which rose every year, the Blessing of the Grace ceremony. We were lucky in that we came to an understanding with the group that was involved that the protest would be called off, and in fact it has been called off for good.
We basically are the umbrella organisation for a lot of this work. We have a job promoting the whole idea of a shared future, I suppose, in practice, both with groups on the ground, and we use funding, but we also do support events like this, and we try to lobby in government and try to push government to take decisions which are helpful for this agenda. We fund all of the kind of interface communication networks across Belfast, which means that now in every part of Belfast, people who previously had no contact with each other have direct contact. We also have been involved in mediations on parades and supportive of an organisation called the North Belfast Conflict Transformation Forum, which has brought lots of groups from all different sorts of political positions together to try to create some kind of common framework. We've funded Mediation Northern Ireland to mediate between all sorts of different settings in Ballymena, and we've worked in Derry as well. So we have a huge range of organisations at least trying to establish partnerships, contact and practical programmes for intervention. The purpose is to bring people who've got experience on the ground to connect with people who've got responsibilities in government and the public sector to see how do you make changes, because obviously interfaces are the most difficult part of Northern Ireland, but we have to find ways to actually begin to take steps to move on. So this is a kind of unique conference because people are from all the different sides of the walls, all the government bodies that deal with it, and the idea is to begin a partnership network which could actually make a real difference in people's lives. We've never had such a conference, so wide a range conference as this. So the first piece of success is everybody's in the room. The second one is there are a lot more models of practice. People do know each other in practice. And thirdly, they've identified where the big areas of work are. They're in culture, they're in youth work, they're in common approaches to social and economic issues, and they've started to actually work on a lot of those in a lot of different areas. There is this big framework called a shared future, and the attempt is to try to put some flesh in the bones to actually make it real, and not just real for groups here, but actually to identify what are the steps practically would need to be taken, where are the priorities, where do interfaces fit into the whole picture of the rest of Northern Ireland. And so we're trying to get people to get a feel of that by talking to each other and by identifying those priorities for the next 3 years. Triennial Action Plan is the government's lists of things they're going to do for the next 3 years in relation to interface or areas. It actually goes far further than that, but we're focusing on this part. And the reason it matters is because it, for the first time, identifies positive steps that the people are going to take. Secondly, the fact that there is a plan means it's going to change, so you can put new stuff onto it. And the third thing is that you can actually measure change. You can actually say, did this happen or did it not? And the government's got involved. It hasn't just devolved it onto people living up beside interface walls.
Today I'm here speaking on behalf of the North Belfast Conflict Transformation Forum, which is a forum made up of peacebuilding practitioners to look at the strategic issues around the advancement and promotion of peacebuilding in North Belfast. The idea of the programme is basically that each practitioner brings his discrete practice to the table with a view to identifying gaps and see what we can work on a collaborative and partnership-based approach. We have an interface monitoring programme through the Conflict Transformation Forum, and also a learning accreditation programme where we're trying to develop a culture of learning around peacebuilding, to develop a language of peacebuilding skills development that will be taken into communities. Success is an interesting kind of word because peacebuilding, it kind of comes dropping slow if you want to look at it in that sense. The success to date has been to create a process, a vibrant, dynamic process, where a lot of the kind of key stakeholders in peacebuilding activity, conflict resolution, are at the table, and that's one of the kind of significant milestones of the work to date. I think the first point is to acknowledge the efforts of Belfast Interface Project and the Community Relations Council and all the delegates here today, because it's a welcome debate, it's a timely debate, it's a debate that needs to be taken beyond these rooms into communities, because the challenge of a shared future is a challenge that we all have to face up to. We have all a collective responsibility to create a shared future, a future that kind of is based on trust and respect.
Our group works in a little tiny kind of Protestant pocket of outer West Belfast that is completely surrounded by, we're a little orange pocket if you like, in the middle of the great big kind of green sea of outer nationalist West Belfast. And we do obviously work within our own community, but a lot of our work is based around building relationships with the kind of nationalist communities around us, particularly on the Suffolk and Lenadoon interface. Our interface was a very violent interface that was kind of fronted, if you like, by derelict, semi-derelict shops, houses, very bleak, very barren, your typical kind of concept of an interface community. And over the past 10 years we've been working with the Lenadoon Community Forum to create shared space on the interface. So with the help of particularly Northern Ireland Housing Executive, we have demolished all of the kind of blight that was on the interface, and we're creating shared space there. We've already built a new row of shops with office space up above it that is jointly owned by both communities, and it's run as a social economy project that actually generates project income that is then shared back into the two communities to create community sustainability. And we're just about to start on the second phase of that, where we'll be extending the row of shops and building a new 50-place childcare centre that will bring 20 jobs into the area and create full day care for up to 50 children. And all of that is owned by both communities. And it's all about kind of integration and peace building and creating shared resources and shared projects. I think a lot of the work that we're doing out there is kind of already recognised by a lot of the funders and things has been very innovative and very successful. You know, there are a lot of lessons that we have learned from that. It's been a long, slow process to get to where we are, and we're always a bit concerned that people come out now and see what we've done and kind of think, oh, this is great, you know, without realising the kind of journey that we've had to come on to get there. And certainly we think we've learned very valuable lessons and very valuable experiences that we do now try to share with other people who are only starting out on that journey. Our project has only been successful because it came from the communities. It was community-led. On the bottom, it wouldn't have worked if government bodies had come in and tried to inflict it on us. You know, it had to come from the will of people in two communities. And at the beginning, it involved a very small handful of people who were actually prepared to take those steps and at a great deal of kind of risk with no guarantee of success. But those people need and will continue to need a lot of support from funders and statutory agencies and things, because it's a very long-term process. We're always a bit worried that people come out and see now and think, oh, this is great, you've solved all the problems, you don't need us anymore, you know, because we will need that support. It can't be fixed overnight, problems that have taken generations to develop.
It's all sorts of different type of community work, everything, you know, from dealing with somebody's housing complaint or an eviction, right through to, you know, training people, to dealing with interface problems, which could be, you know, sitting down and negotiating with people on the other side, or just dealing with somebody's getting their window busted because somebody's thrown a brick from the other side. Like in the last couple of years, probably in the last 12 months, we've put about 300 people through training. We've set up a whole series of organisations, you know, addressing, you know, different issues within the community, and we work with about 25 different groups. You know, we would work with young people who would be out in the street, and we've actually set up a drop-in, which our organisation doesn't now actually operate it, but it's, you know, parents and young people themselves who actually do it. So we would initiate a lot of things and sort of help to facilitate groups to get off the ground. But once they do it, then we would still be there to support them, but we wouldn't necessarily actually do it themselves. So we would open doors for a lot of people. And I mean, there's loads of stuff like that. You know, I mean, there's other stuff that we've worked on in terms of redevelopment, where we've got, very, very high sort of quality housing which has been built, and that's been based on negotiations with housing associations and the housing executive. And I mean, there's people who come from different parts of North Belfast to see the type of housing that we have.
The Good Relations Unit within the Belfast City Council operates on a number of levels. We would look at policy, so particularly around a shared future, where one of the responsibilities with Council is to look at the regeneration of interface areas. So we're working with a number of organisations to look at ways in which we could kind of galvanise the efforts around regenerating interface areas and supporting the really positive work that's happening at a grassroots level at the moment. We would also have a small funding scheme where we would fund a number of projects across the city who are looking at building relationships and managing tensions and violence at interface areas. So that's really kind of a small investment in a lot of the good work that's happening within communities, whether that's around dialogue, whether it's mediation processes, whether it's citizenship work with young people, or whether it's really looking at kind of cultural identity and the heritage of an area. The kind of cultural expressions within the city that sometimes are contested. So things like working with people who wish to celebrate the 11th of July through bonfires, and how you can make them to be a more positive expression for local communities. Also looking at St Patrick's Day, how you can make St Patrick's Day celebrations within the city more inclusive, so that people feel that they can take part in the celebrations. So it operates at a number of levels, good relations within the council, and we hope that under a shared future there'll be be more work for us rather than less.
Everybody wants to see the walls getting brought down. Everybody wants to see the boundaries getting taken away. Do the housing executive help it? I don't think they do at present, no. I think a lot of the housing strategy and a lot of the housing provision in Belfast is still delineated along sectarian lines, and I think also that the security issue, or the national security issue, still plays a part in where houses are built in Belfast.
I would say the housing executive, they're probably to the fore of it. I have to be honest, in the area where I work and the area where I live, the housing executive are looking imaginatively of how to deal with the issues. They are now listening to the people. They're not just getting in and saying, well, we're going to build a wall here, we're not going to build it. There is consultation. Now, it isn't perfect, and you're not going to make everybody happy. If you live next to an interface, maybe the security of a wall is what you need, or maybe it's not, or maybe the design just isn't as scenic to look out your window at. But I think there is examples there where the housing executive in particular are learning. Other organisations to various different degrees. The education boards need to look at the whole issues around interface areas, and they need to be doing joint up approaches. There are not enough joint up approaches between formal and informal education systems. There needs to be utilisation of each other's strengths to build more better communities.
Mixed housing areas are, in the first instance, pilot projects. They're only useful to say this is possible, and that's why they're important. I think over time it's how do you free up the housing market so that people who need houses get houses. That really is the goal, and that means that people over time can move into areas just because a house becomes available. It's free for them, and over time we get mixed communities because people start to take different choices. I think there is no quick fix on this. The reason people live in separated communities and working class areas mostly is because they don't feel safe. And so we have to create not just housing areas, but places where people feel safe, places where they can go to school, places where the facilities are open to them and they can go to the shops. So there's a whole lot of things come around housing areas. The priority is, I suppose, first of all, improving the quality of the actual plant there, the houses. The second thing is to encourage community development and partnership that goes across the walls. And the third thing is to begin the discussion about how areas aren't just one sort of a type. Now that could include, in the first instance, not building housing estates, building social housing and among other kinds of housing, so it becomes more easy to move and easy to mix and all this kind of thing. So we're we're involved with them in thinking about what are practical steps you could take in different areas. The other issue is taking down some of the more aggressive murals, working with community organisations to try to re-image what communities are actually about.
What's your feelings on creating mixed housing?
I don't think it'll work in areas like this. I think what they're doing, I think it's Enniskillen or they've started this pilot project. I think it's great. I don't think personally in my generation we will see mixed housing in an area like Suffolk, because I think you can't force people into things that they're not ready for. And a little tiny, maybe if the communities are more equally kind of sized, if you like, integrated housing is a possibility, but in a little tiny community like ours, to introduce mixed housing in an area like West Belfast, where there's a huge kind of a nationalist housing need, would eventually, within a very short space of time, just bring about the complete disintegration of the Protestant community.
I think mixed feelings if you want to look at that sense. I'd rather see a much greater degree of investment in local capacity, that the change is natural and evolved, where people's quality of life improves, as opposed to something that's socially engineered. Now, I do recognise the symbolism of it, I think it's important, but I much prefer the track where things are evolved, where there is significant investment in family homes, in employment, in education.
I think it's a laudable idea, it's a good idea, but it's got to be made real as well, because, like for example, where we work, there's a very, very high demand for housing, yet on the other side of an interface there's maybe 100 houses that are lying derelict, and then we're now talking about building brand new houses in an entirely new site in Girtwood Park. So who's going to be living in those houses? I mean, I would love this. I mean, I lived in a mixed area, but I actually had to move out because every time I wanted to go and buy a newspaper, or every time I wanted to take kids for a walk, I had to get into a car. Now, that's obviously a couple of years ago, and the situation has moved on from there. But I think that it's an idea whose time has probably come. I mean, I've seen the stuff on the news about Enniskillen. Maybe there is parts of North Belfast that are sort of mixed, more sort of middle class areas, and the area that I work in would have been the last working class area that was mixed. But I mean, there's a big wall that divides Manor Street. But hopefully that's going to, because of the fact that people hopefully won't be worrying about somebody rapping their door and shooting them, that this will begin to break down.
The Housing Executive is heavily involved in most, if not all, of the interface areas in Belfast. A lot of the big housing issues in the city here would be concentrated on interface areas. Issues like dereliction and poor housing conditions, issues like heavy amounts of housing need at some of the areas. So the priorities for us are to try to work towards the regeneration of these areas whilst working very, very closely with the communities that live there, finding agreed solutions to the housing problems and trying to implement them in a consistent and effective way. And I think the important thing for us to understand is that the needs of each of the areas, while similar in some ways, tend to have their own unique factors. So we very much tailor our approach to the individual area, consult with the people living there, and try to secure the investment to improve conditions for those living in the areas.
How important do you feel is a strategy for creating mixed housing?
The Executive understands very clearly the diseconomies of the situation where people live separately. There is quite a significant cost to the public purse of funding separate facilities, be it separate schools, separate leisure centres, or indeed separate housing areas. So we're very conscious of the benefits that could be attained from moving to a situation where people felt ready and able to live in shared communities. And to that extent, we would want to work with communities and support communities in areas where there is housing need and housing demand, and where those communities feel ready and able to move to that point. We would be very, very supportive of that, and indeed it would be one of our commitments in the Shared Future Triennial Plan to work on shared future housing where it's possible to deliver it. We recently had one of the first pilot schemes opened in Enniskillen. To do this in an interface community would be significantly more challenging and maybe more difficult than in other areas in Northern Ireland. But we are always holding ourselves ready to respond to any type of opportunity for this that might emerge. There's always additional resources needed. I think probably the people living in the areas would be better placed to tell you where it should be channeled for us in the housing executive, certainly if we have developed housing schemes to deal with dereliction or to deal with housing need, we have always found that the money has been made available through our own department to deliver that scheme. So we certainly, from the straight housing provision point of view, have never suffered from a lack of resources to carry out schemes that were necessary. I'm sure there are gaps in funding around youth provision, around sustaining community groups and community workers that are there, and but probably the community people themselves would be better placed to spell out those deficiencies for you. The housing executive is always willing to play its part with the local communities in determining what the needs of their communities are. Having said that, some of the issues you're raising are a product of the housing market at the moment, where developers are purchasing land, seeking planning permission for accommodation and housing, and there's not a lot that the housing executive can do in relation to that. But we'll always work with communities to try to agree strategies and action plans for their own community that we can hopefully help to deliver over time.
Do you think more resources should be put into education in interfaces areas, and why?
I don't know about more resources, better targeting of resources, more advertising of resources, getting more information, because there's groups like the WA and the Ulster People's College, and they have funding, they have courses, they have tutors ready and waiting to deliver tailor-made courses to these communities. Resources isn't the problem, it's encouraging uptake, soliciting participation, especially in loyalist communities where there isn't a great value on community-based education, not compared to the nationalist or republican communities. We're dealing with two different histories. The loyalist communities have always relied on the state to provide for them. It was seen as their state, whereas the nationalist and republican communities felt that any benefits that were going to come to their community were going to have to be driven from the bottom up. They were going to be community inspired as compared to resources poured down from the government above,
We need the resource education. I think, tackling the issue of sectarianism in the North is going to take a generation. I think we need to start with the young people that are here now, and that has to be through the education sector, working with the community and voluntary sector. There needs to be more money invested in education and single identity and cross-community work.
In the east and south of the city there, we used to have a leisure centre, Macefield Leisure Centre. It's now closed. So it is. In Short Strand and in the market, there's no adequate resources there for people to go and do sports. So that's all out the window completely. So you're leaving. That leads to, and one thing, leads to bad health. It also leads to lack of resources where kids are knocking about the streets. They have nowhere to go. There's no youth club within the market. There's a youth club within the Short Strand. There's a third of the youth population in Belfast live in East Belfast. So there is. So they're not even as resourced as North and West Belfast. That's a third living in that part of the city, and they're not as resourced youth-wise and financially. I think the Belfast board, needs to get a wake-up call. Funding body needs to get a wake-up call. They can't expect youth workers, community workers to overstretch themselves to the extent where it's affecting their health. So everything that community and youth workers do leads to a better society. It's about education, it's about showing role models, it's about moving society on at a local level and fitting it into the jigsaw of broader society. That needs to be resourced. You cannot have short-term funding for long-term problems. If you're saying that government needs to be maintained on a long-term basis, Assembly has been paid for when it wasn't even working. So why are we not employing the money into communities to say, well, when people are working and they're working extra hours, they should be being paid for it? The education is the key to most things. If you have an ignorant base, then they don't know what is out there for them. They don't have an expectation. And I think governments sometimes are happy for people within interfaith communities not to know all about what they're entitled to, not to be educated on what the issues are. I mean, if you're educated on, for example, the health issues, when we have conflict within interfaith areas affects health. I mean, there's statistics are that to say that you're twice as likely to suffer mental health problems if you live in an interfaith area. Right? Social deprivation in interfaith areas isn't just a phenomenon that just happens. When people won't come in and pump money into an area which is seen to be extreme with violence, it is not a nice place to live in for people. I mean, especially, and I'm taking it from both sides of the coin, but specifically in Short Strand, I'm looking there's no housing. The sustainability of that community is under threat because young people growing up will not have somewhere to live. But yet we have a large barracks in the area. We have a large bus station which could be relocated and give room for social housing. The house prices are going up because it's city centre areas, so they are. And the same in the market and other areas which surround the city centre. The city centre is getting broader. So education in all those fronts is important. It also gives people the chance to move on in life and attain better things for themselves. I mean, job expectations improve, health expectations improve, social expectations improve. By and large, interface areas are working class communities.
I take the bus into work, you know. I take it home, I get it in the city centre and travel back to East Belfast. And I see kids around the city hall with their skateboards, their goths, their rockers, their whatever, you know. And they're coming from all ends of the town to meet, you know. So no, I would be very, very optimistic for Belfast. Yes, there's certain areas of it, but I think it's to do with funding, it's to do with investment in those areas to bring them in par with others. And yes, there is an issue around interfaces, you know, we can't deny that. But I think a lot of money needs to be pumped into those areas, as I say, once again, to bring them in par with others.
Youth policing is very important because young people usually carry out most of the violence, and they somehow pick up from their other communities that it's okay to attack other people. So good youth policies and provision are very important for all of the areas. But it's not the housing executive's responsibility. That's the responsibility of the youth service.
I think education plays a role. I think if we put all of our eggs into one basket, be it education or be it economic regeneration, then we kind of miss opportunities that happen in other areas. So I think it does have to be holistic regeneration, and it's not just about education processes. I mean, often young people are seen as the kind of agents of social change in areas that have experienced conflict for, you know, decades. And so I think it really has to be kind of cross-generational. It has to be across sectors. I mean, there is education that's often needed sometimes within kind of the statutory agencies about how what are the dynamics in an interface area. So I suppose there is a training and learning capacity that needs to be built across all communities, across all sectors and across all ages.
I experience a problem with education in terms of my remit for part of my funding was to do training programs with the groups on issue-based stuff. So we identify what the issue is with the group. We are there continuously with the group, working through the processes to work through the issues, if you like. Initially, we recognised the training that the groups would need to move the issue on. But by the time we've moved the issue on, the training comes about in the sense that we've accessed it, we've resourced it. People no longer want it. So our strength is in mentoring as opposed to education. But yes, there is a lot of, in terms of youth, there needs to be a lot more education.
One of the things that we're about in the Conflict Transformation Forum is about developing a culture of learning, where we can empower people with the critical tools to have the hard conversations in a way that's not personal, in a way that's our understanding. We need to build new understandings here in the society. We need new language. We need language that gives hope. But you have to meet people where they're at. If they have fears, they're quite understandable. If they have misconceptions, they're understandable. We need to address that in a way that's about building capacity. It's about building learning.
Education, experience, you know, I think that government has to take a lot of responsibility. You know, we're engaged in trying to work with people from the opposite religion, you know, community groups. And every time you raise an issue which is anyway contentious, to try and move the agenda on, people are stepping in and trying to actually prevent any sort of controversy so that it's a nice wee discussion rather than actually addressing the underlying issues. And, you know, before you can move on, you've got to address the underlying issues. And as well as that, for example, no government body or no funding body can do anything around the environment without first checking whether what they're going to do is going to be negative to the environment, positive to the environment or neutral. But in terms of community relations, there's no way of doing that. So every day of the week, government agencies are doing things which are having a negative impact on community relations.
Belfast City Council wouldn't have a direct statutory provision for young people, apart from obviously being citizens of the city. But we do support some work with young people, and particularly through our leisure centres and our community centres, where there would be various programmes that would run, whether that's through our play schemes, whether it's through some of the summer work that happens, or whether it's through some of the kind of midnight soccer initiatives that happen. There's the big one that's at the waterworks that we support through the Good Relations Fund, but also then that's happening in other areas like Navanale Leisure Centre, where they're looking at how do you support young people outside of kind of the official or normal hours of leisure centres and leisure services. How do you engage them in kind of positive community activity?
Young people are the prime resource in all this. I still consider myself fairly young, but particularly for a lot of young people, teenagers who, quite often have very little to do to fill their times in the summer evenings or whatever else, we need to meet those young people. They're a key resource for the future. And when we lost one of those people through the criminal justice system, we lost potential within our community. So, we do need an integrated approach to youth provision in a way that empowers young people to take ownership of their own future.
What I think you need to do is have a proper programme and curriculum where people, as a matter of course, are engaged in some of these topics and with other people, that they're the kind of provision we have isn't just summer emergency provision, but gets people, in a sense, prepared and runs through the summer with proper normal programmes so they don't just stop when the difficult periods arrive. And also where there's this tied in with community leadership, that it's not just on its own.
A lot of what our interface workers do is around trying to develop projects with youth. And I think particularly in Suffolk community, although Lenadoon have had the same problems, we have no designated youth worker in Suffolk. We had the funding for our only youth worker post removed 3 years ago, and we've been fighting to try and get it back. So, people will complain about the fact that youth are hanging around the interface creating problems. But there's no point in them complaining. It needs resources to be able to do positive things with that. And through our interface workers now, we are starting to kind of try and develop initiatives with youth. But it's a long, slow process. But I think actually youth are very willing to engage. They're much more willing to engage than a lot of the older people are. But they need support to be able to do that. And education is a huge big part of that. About breaking down, as I say, misconceptions and learning about people. That's what our childcare centre is designed to do, to bring children together from birth so that they can learn and grow and develop together.
You need good youth workers who are able to go out and relate to the young people, and you need good facilities. And again, BLB in particular needs to sort of hang its head in shame, because I'm a community worker working in the lower Cliftonville. I don't know what BLB do. I don't know what there is no youth provision in the lower Shankill apart from, or in the lower Cliftonville, apart from that provided by community groups. And even whenever we apply for resources for youth workers, people are saying, I'm sorry, we can't really give it to you because it's BLB are supposed to be doing that, and they don't. So they really need a strategy, and not a strategy that's up in the ether. They need a strategy which is practical and on the ground. And at this point in time, it's not there. So you've got a lot of young ones who they come out of school without any skills. They're in school, and the subjects that they're doing are irrelevant to them. We would have a lot of young ones who would be very good with their hands. Now, to be good with your hands, you actually have to be good with your brain too. But they could go and strip a house of slates, radiators. And there needs to be a way of actually bringing those people in, because there's a big shortage of corrugated engineers. There's a shortage of skilled people. Yet at the same time, our biggest resource is allowed to, walk around the streets of North Belfast, smoke and blow or whatever.
I think the schools have more to play. Specifically those schools that are in interface areas. I think they could be doing a whole lot more. We find that in trying to bring in education into schools on interface issues, on peace building themes, to an extent, there are gatekeepers within the educational system that won't let us in, and that has been a problem for us. We did quite recently do a leaflet in North Belfast which portrayed the consequences of violence at the interfaces for young people in the schools. We're very receptive in terms of taking the posters and putting them up. But I think education has a large part to play with young people. In terms of taking the education into communities, I think it's very difficult to teach an old dog new tricks. I think our strength is in actually mentoring the groups through the issues, through developing, working on the processes and developing the mechanisms where they can work through the issues themselves, hands-on, rather than identifying training that they need to do that for themselves, because more often than not the issue has been resolved or has gone away by the time the training comes around. So it's a bit of a false economy in terms of being funded to do something like that when you can see a quicker and better way through it.
The overall political picture in the north is crucial to addressing the issue of interfaces, the issue of inter-community confrontation. If you have a positive, bigger political picture, that will be reflected on the ground. If an agreement is reached at a political level, I think that will be reflected on the ground.
There are places in Belfast where you would be forgiven for, you'd be mistaken that the peace almost like the peace process does not exist. I mean, when tensions are high in places like White City or Suffolk, there's very little peace process for these people, you know what I mean? These people still live in fear of attack and still live with all the consequences of conflict, you know. And people who are fortunate enough not to live in these areas, you know what I mean, are further down the road. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that if the Downing Street Declaration was the beginning of the two governments making peace with each other, that the Good Friday Agreement was about the political parties making peace with each other, the ceasefires were about the paramilitaries making peace with each other, the communities haven't yet made peace with each other. And as events and interfaces in places like Hawkell and Harryville have demonstrated that there is still deep-seated bigotry that needs to be addressed. I think interfaces have the potential to destabilise the peace process because you can think that things are nice and calm. It only takes an incident on an interface, especially an interface in what is perceived as a besieged community, the likes of White City or Suffolk, and where people feel that they are surrounded and the siege mentality prevails. Violence or attacks on these communities has kind of serious consequences for wider Belfast. So I think people who live in interfaces, primary concern is safety. They want to feel safe, and if that's people in Suffolk feeling safe enough to use the garage on the Blacks Road, people in White City feeling safe enough to venture onto the Whitewell Road, and for people to sleep in their beds easy at night, you know. I mean, in the course of my work, I've visited communities, and it's 2006, it's 12 years or whatever after the ceasefires, 8 years after the signing of the Good Friday Agreement, and there are families on both sides who won't allow their children to sleep in bedrooms at, say, the back of the house, if the back of the house backs onto a peace wall. So it's 2006, and that's still the case, that you've got families who live in 3-bedroom houses but can only live out of 2 bedrooms because for fear of putting them in that back bedroom, you know.
Even for people who live in interface areas, they actually blot out the interface. So it's not as if it becomes a mindset, it becomes a way, you know, they don't necessarily be thinking, oh, I can't go down this street. They sometimes don't even think about things like that because it's so ingrained in their culture that they don't even think about it. But I mean, it means that, in some areas, if you go to a certain bus stop instead of a bus stop, you know, down the street, which is totally crazy. I mean, there's obviously facilities. If you have to go to a hospital, you can't walk there. You have to go by car. There's, leisure facilities. I mean, some people can't go to, leisure facilities in North Belfast, and the main one that you had in Belfast, where people from both communities were able to access, they've actually closed it down. So, I mean, shops as well. I mean, you would get maybe some fellas that wouldn't be confident about going to shops, whereas women would. But there's also areas that people just wouldn't go into. You know, how can you really say that you've got a peace process when you've got areas like North Belfast scared by interfaces and people living in fear, real or imagined, you know, but we've also got to address the interfaces in people's heads.
There are issues around where people live, and that has been a process been going on for 30 years, in fact longer than that, and there's no doubt whatsoever that more people now than ever live in segregated spaces, but people work together more. There are more people in mixed relationships. The city centre has developed a different kind of a culture where people come from all over. There are a lot of educational institutions, and in some ways middle class areas have moved on relatively quickly, but a lot of the people caught in interfaces are caught in the worst of all of this. So part of the job is to make sure that they're not left with the problem while everybody else moves on, and engages people in thinking about what practical steps can we take to make sure that interfaces in the long run disappear.
I think one of the good things that I think has happened in communities, particularly over the last 10 years, has been the partnership approach, where public servants, people from, for example, just as I mentioned, the Housing Executive, the City Council, OFM, DFM, PSNI, have actually been working with local communities to understand what the problems are in those communities, what the people want. I mean, public bodies can't go into communities and do things to people. You've got to work with community leaders and representatives to build communities in terms of their image, in terms of their confidence, in terms of what they look like, in terms of developing communities that people really want to live in. So, of course, we can always do more, but I'm pleased that there are lots and lots of very good examples in Belfast, but also in other towns and in rural areas where there has been an intensification of that partnership approach, which has to be the way ahead.
I think there's a lot more could be done. I think they've shown a commitment to address it. Whether the resources that it will be required to tackle it and sort out interface areas are forthcoming or not, we'll have to wait and see. But I think they have to do something about it.
I think funding needs to be streamlined, and I wouldn't just say for the interfaces, but yes, certainly, initially it has to look at the interfaces, and there must be a certain amount of money taken from each organisation that has a responsibility to youth, to be set aside for youth. To do that, for me, would certainly address a lot of the problems. But I think it runs deeper too. I think that whilst we educate the young people at different events and those kids from the interfaces, we are then faced that these young people go back home into the environment that the issues are still alive in, So I think it's about striking a balance. We also need to look at educating the parents. We need a change of attitude to move the whole process forward.
And the facilities need to be open. As it is, the youth facilities are often shut. People are on holiday at the very time when a lot of communities are under pressure. But I think if you're only starting to engage with young people to take them off the street at the moment when there's a riot, it's not going to work either. You have to have good programmes, good workers, good things, so that young people are saying, actually, I want to keep part of that programme and stay in that rather than get involved in all that kind of trouble that occurs. I mean, there's no magic bullet here. There is a lot of difficult steps, but you're certainly right. We need to open up the facilities for people at summertime and get the workers in and make sure that there's proper provision.
I think a number of people and political constituencies and other agencies have worked tirelessly to ensure there was a peaceful summer. But I think we need to redouble our efforts for next year. Parades particularly has the potential to upset the apple cart and create a sense of crisis and tension. We need to avoid all of that stuff. So whatever influence that people have needs to be encouraged in a way that builds confidence.
The orange marches were not as contentious this year as previous. There had been some accommodations which led to an easing of tensions. But I think the most positively is a lot of in the area where we're working, a lot of the stuff on a cross-community basis did not break down over July. They continued on. People are now starting to get the realisation where July should not close down cross-community work. So it shouldn't. And also there's a great emphasis going on at the minute too. People are now trying to educate within their own community. That here, one stone leads to another, and then we all get hurt in the end. People are fast coming to realisation. I think there's a lack of people now accepting it. Personally, within the Shortstone Community Forum, we are now saying that we want quality work. We want it to be done at the time when it is the contentious time. I mean, the parades issues, you know what I mean? In Shortstone, we have 25 parades to 30 parades pass throughout the year. So it's not just a July thing for us, it's a throughout the year. But the July is the focus with the bonfires, the raising of tensions, holiday periods, schools are out. And in fact, a lot of youth clubs even closed down in July. What we're saying now is no, we need to look at when we need the resources deployed. We need to redouble our efforts. We need to be saying July should not matter. For example, when we started one of our projects, we worked right up to the 10th of July and we were back at it again on the 13th. So really all you were giving people is a chance to just have a wee break for those 2 nights. You weren't saying like, oh, and you were back discussing what was crack at the bonfire or what do you think of it. And kids from our area were saying, well, we were a bit intimidated or frightened, or okay, you just looked as if you're having a great time. And kids from the prosecutor were saying, well, we do that every year, and it's great crack down at the bonfire, having a drink, having a crack, and that is the way they look at it. They don't look at the broader politics of it. In a diverse world, you need to understand where each other are coming from. Take it in a simpler terms of a marriage. If the wife and the husband do not understand what their likes and dislikes are, they will not have a happy marriage. I mean, if one likes curry and the other one doesn't, you know what I mean, and you put down a curry meal, that's a simple way of doing it. People need to understand where each community is coming from. And we need to understand that the majority of the cultural attributes to our communities are shared. They've just been, for years, attained by each other's community and seen as they're ours or not. It's time we looked at them in a historical point of view and says, what are they about? What do they represent? If they're offensive, we need to recognise they're offensive. We need to have a responsibility with understanding culture, and we need to have a responsibility with expressing culture. You can't just say culture is ours and we can ram it down somebody's throat. We need to say, well, okay, if it's mine, if I have a culture in the house of passing wind, I don't do it in a bus beside somebody because it's offensive, but I'm happy enough to do it in the house because I'm watching TV and it's not going to annoy anybody, and I'm the one who has to live with the smell. If there's culture outside, it needs to be expressed in an unoffensive manner.
And when you look around the room today, when you see the breadth and depth of the speakers and you see the community activists involved from all over Belfast, representing all traditions, representing all minorities, and the work that is actually taking place now in interfaith communities between both sides, it represents a positive step forward. In 20 years' time, I wouldn't like to think that there would be any interface areas in the north. If there is, we've all failed. The government and community, statutory, voluntary sector, we've all failed if interface areas continue in 20 years' time. I don't think there'll ever come a time when nationalists or Republicans would feel comfortable drinking, for example, on Talkmona Social Club, or unionists would feel safe drinking in the felons or whatever, although I can't see any reason. But in relation to statutory providers, in relation to the library, in relation to the train station, in relation to schools and play facilities, we are hoping that we reach a situation where there is shared access and where the perceptions and the misperceptions that exist within both communities are broken down and challenged.
If in 5 and 10 years' time that we're still sitting with the same situation, that people feel threatened or insecure about going to different places, then we haven't met our targets. We need to be setting ourselves a vision where we all can feel that we can travel across communities, within communities, and access the services that we all need. That's the reality of it, that's the business that we're in.
My personal take on it is that in the last 3 years, the ground is beginning to be laid to beginning to break down some of the divisions that exist. I mean, the quiet-ish summer that we had in 2006, I think, can only help towards communities beginning to understand each other and maybe moving towards a less divided society. So I'd be reasonably optimistic as to what maybe lays ahead in the next 5 to 10 years.
I mean, I think that there has been a sort of a breakdown in sectarianism to some degree. You know, I think that, you know, certainly 10 years ago, you wouldn't have been able to walk too far from one community to the next. And I know even people who, you know, work from, say, the Protestant community, but I've seen them walking through, you know, the likes of the Lower Clivenville. I've seen them walking on the Antrim Road. So, you know, the barriers are certainly coming down. I don't sort of buy this idea that the place has become much more polarised. I think as well that a lot of young people that get caught up in it they get caught up in it for a whole number of reasons. They're not necessarily, bigots or sectarians. Yeah, I mean, they do things which are antisocial behaviour, but it's not because they actually hate a lot of people. But certainly in the last 30 years, what you have is that you have got quite a section of society living in our communities that have no contact whatsoever with people from the opposite religion, and that raises a big problem for the future.
We need to make the small steps that are necessary, but we also need to make progress on the big issues. My final comment was a quotation from Seamus Heaney that I believe passionately in, where in his poem Curate Troy he says, and I quote, "Believe that a further shore is reachable from here." In other words, we are on the road, I believe, to improving things, but we have to believe that we can actually get to the other side, and we can do that together through working together, through listening together, through action plans, and making sure that that we all understand where one another's coming from.
My work is out on the streets with the people that need the help. This is good in as much as that it brings people together to compare notes, if you like. But the real work is beyond those doors and out in the streets. That's where we make it happen. And it's good to network. Something like it's good to network. And if we can get policy, but I've seen so many other conferences come and go. I've seen strategies been looked at and done by so many different agencies. And the reality is that those reports are now sitting on a shelf, covered in dust. So if something good comes out of it, great. But my expectations would be, and it's no certain reflection on the organisations that are hosting it, until we have political engagement within Northern Ireland, I think our voices are falling on deaf ears.
I mean, we have experience there working with the executive, and it's probably actually a positive experience because, we would argue away with them, but at the end of the day, we do get what's needed by the community. But I have to say that a lot of other statutory agencies, the people who work for them are very good, and whenever you actually can interface with them. But the problem with BLB is you just can't, they're an unknown quantity. There's also other agencies like Invest NI. Nobody in the community probably have even heard of them because they're the people who should be doing creating jobs. Because if young people had decent jobs with a decent wage where they wouldn't be out on a street corner on a Saturday night, then I think that you could turn the situation around in North Belfast. But it seems that there's a layer of government that pay lip service to communities, and as long as that's going to continue, then the problems that we have are always going to blight these areas.
I think today's conference has been very interesting. I mean, hearing the range of kind of different community projects that are going on the ground gives a different perspective to interface communities. It lets people see that it's not all about bad news. There's a lot of good news out there as well, and I'm also interested in recommendations that can go back to government. Shared future, I think, is a great concept, but unless it's going to be backed up with actual resources on the ground, I'd like to think that it's not just rhetoric, but that something practical will actually come out of it.
One of the things that I would like to see is we're struggling with trying to get community groups to come together. We have sort of discussed this issue with statutory agencies, but essentially what's needed here is some level of leadership and somebody to actually come together to try. It's not to reassure one community over another, but it's to try and actually go through, to get communities to go through a process. And I've been speaking there to Duncan Morrow, and hopefully he's going to initiate a process like that, which would actually bring residents and people involved in community groups in inner North Belfast together. And hopefully you have a major opportunity around Gertwood, because it's now been released, it's in DSD hands, and hopefully it'll be in the hands of the community, or at least people will be working there in the not too distant future.
I think it's very important for the different sectors at the tables to be talking about and to be sharing their experiences of working and living in interface communities. Singularly, no sector has all of the answers. The council cannot transform interface communities without the support of the community sector, the voluntary sector, and the other statutory agencies. So I think in terms of the new era of community planning that will be coming through under the review of public administration, I think it's key for events like this that the different sectors dialogue with one another and really look for the kind of can-do options that people can operationalise together.
it was always going to have to wait until the conflict came to an end, and although the conflict's taken 12 years to end in some parts of Belfast, like the Loyalists have only really very recently, only really in the last load of months, fully signed up to the peace process and fully left the conflict behind them. A lot of people thought this had happened a long time ago, but I don't think it had. I don't think it had fully, and I think they were waiting for the Republican movement to completely leave the stage and disarm before they were able to say to their membership with confidence that they wanted the conflict to end. There's been a seismic shift in the last year in interface areas, and it's been caused by a major shift by the Loyalist paramilitaries, who are for the first time fully supportive of interface work and are beginning to recognise the value of inter-community dialogue, and they are engaging properly. Now it's hesitant and it's cumbersome at the minute, but it's showing signs that this is going to be a long-term permanent process that they're engaged in. There is a shift, and it's changed the landscape, and it contributed greatly to the quiet summer we had, because quite frankly Loyalist paramilitaries didn't want a repeat of the trouble that they marred 2 years ago, marching season in places like Highfield and East Belfast. I think as Duncan Morrow, the Chief Executive of the CRC, said, this is a long thing. I mean, there remains entrenched attitudes here and deep-seated bigotry, and that's going to take that's a generational thing. That's going to take a long time to. But a start has been made. A start has been made for sure. I think interfaces will be here for many years to come. In the public housing sector, we've almost got total ethnic residential segregation. There's new plans to have integrated housing in North Belfast, and there was a new project in for Manager during the week. But these interfaces are here for many years to come, and managing them and improving the lines of communication and the relationships in our community is going to prove to be vitally important.
First and foremost, I would like to see peace on them. I mean, I don't think there is peace on interface areas at the minute. I think there's a whole transformation of what's going on and the management of the conflict in interface. But the potential is still there for it to explode. And if you look at interface conflict throughout this past decade, I mean, it's been very politically motivated, so it has. When there's a term recreational ratting, I find that the most of ratting that has ever happened on the interface has been politically motivated, i.e. for policing or for control of certain areas and governmental just ignoring of what's going on. I think that my view is that walls will come down to us. I think there's a view there now that it's a 10-year process, and it's realistic. So it is that, but relationships are important. That relationships need to be built upon. People need to understand each other. Need to understand our fears and concerns from both sides, not just from one perspective, and build on reassuring each other's community that there's nothing to fear. So isn't. And that's not having a fairy approach to it. That's having a real approach, saying, let's get in there, let's work hard, let's do what needs to be done, let's take the risks, and let's ensure the walls come down, stability's there, employment increases for our young people, and people start to have pride in their communities.
If I had my way, I would build expensive houses and encourage middle classes to buy these houses, to try and change the whole environment, the whole way, the whole concept of interfaces. 20 years time, I would predict that there will be no interfaces, but I think it's going to take an awful lot of money to change it, to change the whole environment, regenerate the areas. Well, I certainly would like to see some sort of policy, some central policy that would address all interfaces, that there would be some form of good practice, which, you know, we wouldn't be working in isolation of each other. I think that certainly needs to happen, but a year's a short time. When you look at interfaces, it's a very short time. I mean, it's kind of, you know, we come to the parade situation, it goes away and it rolls. You know, it's never far from people's minds.
In 10 years' time, I'd like to see less of them. I would like to see more normality around people moving into houses where houses are available. I would like to see, where they still exist, that people are at least able to move across them in their everyday business, so that if there's a library on the one side or a health centre on the other side or a swimming pool on the other side, they can take their kids or they can go there. I would like to see it in youth work. You know, people do actually know each other a little bit, that there's some kind of programme which engages people in a sense of, you know, we've common projects. And the other thing is good partnership networks between community organisations where there's good communication and negotiation of key issues.
I think you have to remain to be optimistic. I think the key point is that local people are empowered, there's sufficient resources, that there is political stability, that we have a locally devolved political administration. Because while they can do good government, they also create an enabling context for other people who live in communities that are different, that are polarised, to engage in conversations and to work together. We need positive symbolism in all of this. So in that sense, I'm fairly optimistic, but we just need to work at it.
I think I would like to see more employment opportunities. I would like to see more prosperity. I would like to see better housing, better educational provision. I would ultimately like to see some of the barriers between the communities breaking down, that people would feel safe enough to engage. But I think it'll take a lot of work over a lengthy period to move gradually towards that, and it'll be a series of small steps. But I do get the feeling that those small steps are now becoming possible, where maybe a few years ago they weren't.
Our interface group has a 10-year vision policy of living side by side as good neighbours, because we kind of think if you can reach the stage where you don't always agree with what your neighbour thinks, you might get on very well with your neighbour. There might be times you don't even speak to your neighbour, you know. But if you live side by side as good neighbours, then you've actually achieved a lot. And I think it's about introducing normality into interface areas.
We obviously have to move away from interfaces, but you're not going to do that overnight. That's a process, not just one. You know, you're not just going to get a bulldozer and take them all down. And so you've got to work with people's. You know, there is a lot of issues around security, and there's also sort of demographic changes, where some of the you've got sort of derelict houses, and particularly in the exclusively within the unionist areas, where you've got in one street you might have like a dozen or a couple of dozen of houses that are lying derelict. So there's an issue there about how there's one community sort of is in decline, and it's how you can actually reverse that decline. But as long as, if you've got paramilitary is active on an estate, if the estate is run down, how are you going to attract people in? But you also need jobs and services, and I think Girdwood is obviously a big opportunity where you could actually attract people back into the estate, where if you had jobs, and if there was if there was jobs, for example, in Girdwood, people would possibly want to be living locally, but they wouldn't want to be living somewhere where you have paramilitaries running around it, or drug dealers or stuff like that. So you've got to also regenerate these estates. But if you did, people then would want to go in there, and I think you'd have a much more sort of vibrant North Belfast, because it would be mixed. As well as that, you've got Polish people and Indians coming into our communities, and therefore you have the real potential there to create actually a very, very peaceful, multicultural community in North Belfast. And I think in the next 10 years we've got to get real, because the world is moving on, and we sort of need to move on as well.